What if alignment was never just geometry but destiny? What if one day a wanderer from beyond, three-eye Atlas, slid into perfect line with Earth not striking, not vanishing, but aligning, just as old myths warned and science still fears to imagine? Alignment has always carried weight. Solstice stars, equinox shadows, orbits crossing in silent precision. So what happens when Earth and a stranger from the void share that same fragile symmetry? And what does it mean to stand in its shadow? And if you'd like, feel free to share in the comments where you're listening from tonight and whether you've ever seen the sky at its darkest, far from cities, when even silence feels alive. It's always moving to see how far this circle of night watchers reaches. What if alignment itself has always carried dread? For when the solar storm of 2025 etched fire into the sky, and when the name of Three-Eye Atlas first began to ripple into thought, humanity remembered what older civilizations already knew, that to align with forces beyond Earth is to risk being changed by them. What if storms and wanderers alike have always been seen as omens, not because they bring fire or silence, but because their very alignment with us feels like a story we cannot escape? Ancient peoples feared alignment more than almost anything else in the heavens. The Babylonians read dread into eclipses, where sun and moon aligned and shadows swallowed the day. The Maya carved into stone the cycles of Venus, watching closely when it aligned with the sun, believing it marked the rise or fall of kings. In medieval Europe, planetary conjunctions were recorded with trembling hands, tied to plague, war, and famine. Alignment was not symmetry, it was disruption, the moment when the natural order bent towards something extraordinary, something dangerous. Science has always offered calmer explanations. An eclipse is orbit and shadow, not omen. A conjunction is angle, not curse. And yet, even today, alignment draws unease. When the planets lined in the 1,980 seconds, astrologers warned of upheaval. When eclipses cross the Earth now, millions still gather, hushed, as if expecting revelation. If Three-Eye Atlas were ever to align with Earth, not in impact but in geometry, what would it stir in us? Would we call it coincidence or prophecy? Would we measure it only in trajectories or in myths reborn? Alignment unsettles because it implies connection. When Earth aligns with a wandering fragment, we are no longer isolated. We are linked, caught in a pattern larger than ourselves. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found, because once its path is traced, once alignment is imagined, we cannot unsee the possibility that our world is not alone, that lines can be drawn between us and the unknown, and those lines may carry meaning we do not yet understand. And yet, alignment also carries beauty. To watch the sun and moon meet is to see the sky transformed into something rare, unforgettable. To see planets gathered in twilight is to feel the universe arranged, however briefly, into harmony. Perhaps if Three-Eye Atlas were to align with Earth, we would not only fear, but marvel, seeing in its path not threat, but belonging. Alignment becomes reminder that we are not outside the cosmos, but woven into it, connected to wanderers we may never touch, but will always share sky with. Still, unease lingers. For what if alignment is not harmless? What if tides shift, or magnetism stirs, or human imaginations turn alignment into omen once more? What if meaning is forced upon it, whether or not the cosmos intended any? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once alignment is imagined, it will haunt us. No longer possibility, but inevitability. Three-Eye Atlas, and the thought of alignment with Earth together remind us that symmetry in the heavens is never simple. It is always charged, always heavy with meaning. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that to wonder what happens in alignment is to realize we are always aligned, always linked to a universe that bends and breathes around us, and always drawn into its stories, whether we choose to read them or not. What if alignment was not omen, but equation? What if, rather than prophecy etched in stone, the meeting of Earth and Three-Eye Atlas was a matter of mechanics, an orbit, an angle, a crossing of paths calculated in quiet observatories? Science tells us that alignment is no mystery, that it is the geometry of spheres tracing their invisible lanes through the vastness. And yet, when we speak of Three-Eye Atlas aligning with Earth, the imagination refuses to stay still, for even science admits that such alignments can ripple with consequences far greater than simple lines on a chart. In astronomy, alignment is common but never casual. The moon aligns with Earth and Sun to create eclipses, moments that turn day into shadow, exposing stars and corona in the same breath. Planets align in conjunctions, clustering together in our sky as though gathered in secret council. Even galaxies align in perspective, their light bent into patterns by gravity's invisible hand. Each of these alignments is not omen but orbit, not curse but coincidence, and yet each is treated with a reverence that belies its familiarity. If even familiar alignments stir us, what would the geometry of 3i Atlas bring? The visitor itself is reminder of chance, an interstellar fragment, travelling untold distances, its path grazing our sun before it fled outward again. What are the odds that such an object should even be seen, much less traced? To imagine it aligning with Earth, not in collision but in a perfect line, is to stretch the improbable further still. Astronomers would speak of gravitational influence, of how tides and fields might feel faint nudges. They would map the geometry in simulations, predicting where shadows might fall, where light might bend. For science, the alignment would be a data set, a phenomenon to measure with precision. And yet, even science acknowledges mystery. For alignment is not always inert. When the moon aligns with the Earth, tides swell. When planets align, their combined pull, though faint, adds weight to the delicate dance of orbits. When comets align with the sun, their tails flare brighter, etched with new energy. Could the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth carry subtle force and unseen influence, a whisper of change in fields we have not yet measured? Perhaps the question is not whether alignment means anything, but how much meaning our instruments are capable of catching. Science unsettles because it cannot erase wonder. It can explain the mathematics, chart the angles, simulate the outcomes, but it cannot fully still the question. What if this is more than coincidence? Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, its presence insists on being both calculation and omen, both data and story. Even astronomers, staring at their graphs, would feel what ancient priests once felt on temple steps, that alignment carries weight beyond explanation. And yet, science is also reassurance. To know that alignments are natural, that they have happened for eons, that Earth has endured countless shadows and conjunctions, is to breathe easier. The storm of 2025 passed, and so too would this. An alignment would not mean collision, it would not mean doom. It would mean perspective, geometry, a chance to see our world, and a visitor momentarily bound together in symmetry, however fleeting. Still, unease lingers. For what if we underestimate? What if the mathematics is precise, but the consequences reach further than equations predict? What if alignment awakens fears not in nature, but in ourselves, rekindling ancient instincts that treat lines in the sky as portents? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once seen, its alignment with Earth ceases to be unthinkable, and once imagined, it can never be undone. 3i Atlas and the science of alignment together remind us that geometry in the heavens is never only mathematics. It is perspective, mystery, and meaning folded into the same line. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that science and awe are not opposites, but companions, each helping us to stand quietly beneath alignments that are both predictable and profound. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not only an astronomical curiosity, but the awakening of myths older than memory? What if every culture that once looked to the heavens, fearing or worshipping the moments when celestial bodies lined in symmetry, had in some way anticipated this very event? For alignment has always been fertile ground for stories, for prophecy, for dread. What if, beneath the mathematics, there lingers a tapestry of myths that whisper what alignment truly means? Across the ancient world, alignment was woven into legend. In Mesopotamia, eclipses were feared as devourings of the sun or moon. Celestial alignments read as omens of a king's fate. Priests performed substitution rituals, placing a proxy ruler on the throne during the alignment, believing the heavens demanded sacrifice. The Maya, watching Venus rise in perfect cycles, tied its alignments with war and the destiny of rulers, carving its symmetry into stone calendars. In medieval Europe, planetary conjunctions were said to herald plague, famine, or the fall of empires. To align was never neutral, it was destiny revealed, the universe pulling threads that unraveled kingdoms. Comets especially carried this weight. When Halley's comet aligned with the horizon of armies, it was said to decide battles. When fiery visitors streaked through skies, their path against the constellations was read like scripture. Even in the Renaissance, when Copernicus and Galileo began to measure orbits, the myths clung stubbornly. Alignment always interpreted as message, never accident. Were 3i Atlas to align with Earth, myths would awaken as though they had been waiting prophecies dusted off, whispers reignited. Some would see it as warning, others as promise. But none would dismiss its weight. Science would argue for caution, explaining geometry, dismissing superstition. Yet even scientists live in cultures shaped by myth, and even the most careful voices cannot erase what alignment has always meant to humanity. The solar storm of 2025 proved as much. While physicists measured magnetic flux, millions of ordinary eyes turned skyward and felt awe mingled with dread. When 3i Atlas is imagined in alignment, myth and science overlap, each filling the silence left by the other. Myth unsettles because it blurs lines between fear and meaning. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because, once paired with alignment, it becomes a mirror for prophecy, a vessel for whatever cultures most fear or desire. In the East, it may be seen as omen of cycles ending. In the West, as echo of apocalyptic tales. In the South, as reminder of ancestors whose voices still reach through stars. Alignment becomes stage, and we project onto it what we cannot contain elsewhere. And yet, myth is also connection. It ties us to those who lived before, who saw alignments and told stories to make sense of them. To feel myth awaken is to know that we are not the first to wonder, not the first to tremble, not the first to search for meaning in symmetry. In that way, alignment offers not only fear, but kinship. The visitor's silence becomes a shared silence, stretching back through centuries of watchers who also felt that the heavens were speaking, even if no words could be heard. Still, unease lingers. For what if myths shape more than interpretation? What if, in believing alignment to be omen, humanity acts as though it is, shaping wars, choices, destinies in its shadow? What if alignment's danger is not celestial at all, but human, our own readiness to see pattern and give it power? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it is no longer just stone in the dark, but story alive again. 3. Atlas. And the myths of alignment together remind us that symmetry is never empty. It carries the weight of every story ever told beneath the sky. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that when wanderers align with us, the universe does not only reflect geometry, it reflects ourselves. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not a cosmic event at all, but a mirror held up to the human mind? What if, in imagining such symmetry, we reveal less about the heavens and more about ourselves, our fears, our longings, our need to see meaning in the dance of shadows and light? For alignment has always stirred something within, not because it changes the sky so greatly, but because it changes how we see the sky. What if 3i Atlas, aligning with us even in thought, is less celestial body than psychological catalyst? The human mind is drawn to symmetry. Children arrange stones in patterns. Adults build temples aligned with solstices. Civilizations rise around the balance of seasons. Symmetry suggests order, safety, a world that can be understood. Yet alignment, the sudden perfection of paths, also suggests danger, the fragile moment when order seems too precise, as though destiny itself had intervened. Psychologists have long noted this paradox, that the same patterns which comfort us can also disturb us when they appear unexpectedly. The eclipse thrills and unsettles, the conjunction fascinates and unnerves. 3. Atlas in alignment would magnify this tension, pressing imagination into overdrive. Fear and wonder alike would surface. Some minds would see threat in its symmetry. A visitor aligned with Earth must surely mean collision, disruption, omen, where others would see transcendence, proof that humanity is not alone, that the universe speaks in patterns designed for us to notice. The alignment becomes projection screen for everything unsaid in our minds. The anxieties of fragility, the hopes of belonging, the hunger for meaning in the vast indifference of space. Science could chart the line with cold precision, but the human mind would fill the silence with echoes of itself. This is not new. When comets once aligned with constellations, people saw reflections of their lives. Kings read doom, farmers read famine, priests read prophecy. During eclipses, whole villages acted out rituals of fear or renewal, convinced the alignment mirrored their hidden anxieties. Even today, when astronomers explain the cycles clearly, social media still blooms with unease whenever planets cluster in twilight. It is not the sky itself that unnerves us, but the mirror it holds, showing us that we are pattern seekers in a universe that may not have patterns meant for us. The mind unsettles because it cannot stop asking. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once traced into alignment, it will haunt imagination, stirring dread where none may exist, and wonder where no certainty can be found. The mind sees what it wants to see, and alignment gives it permission to see endlessly, turning stone into omen, silence into meaning. And yet, the mind also creates beauty. To see alignment is to feel connected, to believe that the cosmos is not random but resonant. Perhaps that is why ancient temples still inspire awe, aligned as they are with sun and stars, reminding us that our ancestors too sought harmony in the heavens. If 3i Atlas were to align with Earth, perhaps the greater truth is not in physics but in psychology, that the alignment would reveal, once more, the endless human capacity to make meaning, to find story, to feel kinship with a sky that will never know us, yet still shapes us. Still, unease lingers. For what if the mirror shows too much? What if in the alignment we project not only awe but despair, not only reverence but fear of insignificance? What if the danger of alignment is not the object itself, but the shadows of our own imagination stretched across the sky? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it ensures that the truest event is not in the cosmos, but in us. 3i Atlas and the mirror of alignment together remind us that the universe may be silent, but the human mind never is. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that every alignment is both cosmic and personal, both geometry and dream, shaping not only how we see the sky, but how we see ourselves beneath it. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not merely a celestial curiosity or private meditation, but a collective moment, an event that stirred entire societies at once? What if, as in the days when comets terrified kingdoms and eclipses silenced cities, humanity once again found itself responding as a whole, nations and cultures alike leaning into awe, fear, and meaning? For alignment does not belong to the astronomer alone. It belongs to every eye that looks upward, and every voice that carries its weight into community. History reminds us how societies have always moved in the shadow of alignment. The Chinese courts recorded eclipses with such seriousness that failure to predict them was seen as failure of state itself. The Inca viewed solar eclipses as moments when the heavens demanded offerings, whole villages brought together in ritual. Even in more recent centuries, planetary conjunctions have drawn crowds into squares and fields, looking skyward not as individuals but as collectives, their shared wonder turning into festivals, sermons, and panics alike. When 3i Atlas is imagined in alignment with Earth, it is not only the astronomer who trembles. It is the village, the city, the world that asks, what does this mean for us? The storm of 2025 offered a glimpse of this collective response. As auroras spilled southward into skies unaccustomed to their glow, people gathered in fields and rooftops, their phones capturing green fire, their voices hushed. Science explained it, yes, but society lived it differently through shared awe, shared anxiety, shared memory. If 3i Atlas were to align with Earth, the same collective hush would fall. News anchors would speak of geometry, leaders would address calm, philosophers would reflect on meaning, and beneath it all, millions would simply step outside, tilt their faces skyward, and feel small together. Society, however, does not respond evenly. Some would see alignment as threat, drawing connections to prophecies and apocalyptic texts. Others would see it as opportunity, claiming it as omen of renewal, revolution, or spiritual awakening. Markets might flutter with unease, communities might divide over meaning, and in the quiet of uncertainty, myths would bloom once more. Alignment becomes more than event. It becomes mirror of our fractures, a reminder that meaning is never shared equally, but contested, shaped, and carried differently across borders. Society unsettles because it multiplies fear. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once imagined in alignment, it ceases to be private wonder and becomes public weight. Leaders must answer questions no one can resolve. Believers must interpret signs. Skeptics must push back against rising tides of superstition. And alignment, even if harmless in physics, ripples through culture as if the very act of symmetry demanded reaction. And yet, society also magnifies beauty. There is quiet strength in collective awe, in knowing that millions around the globe share the same silence, the same gaze, the same fleeting recognition that we are small beneath something vast. To imagine a world pausing together, even for a moment, is to imagine connection across distance, across division. In this sense, the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth is not only fear, but potential, a chance for shared wonder to soften boundaries, to remind us that before nations, before languages, we are all watchers beneath the same sky. Still, unease lingers. For what if society reacts, not with reverence, but with chaos? What if panic overrides wonder? If superstition overwhelms reason? If fear reshapes history in ways the alignment itself never intended? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it becomes stage for our collective anxieties, an event that tests not the heavens, but ourselves. 3. Atlas and the imagined societies of alignment together remind us that cosmic events are never only cosmic. They ripple through culture, shaping how we gather, how we fear, how we hope. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that alignment does not only connect stars and planets, but also people, binding us briefly in the same moment of wonder. A fragile unity cast in the shadow of the unknown. What if history itself has been bent, again and again, by the quiet force of alignment? What if every era carries within it a moment when the heavens arrange themselves into strange symmetry, and humanity, gazing upward, found its choices shaped by what it saw? For when we imagine 3i Atlas aligning with Earth, we are not only imagining the future, we are echoing the past. A long line of civilizations whose course is bent beneath the weight of celestial patterns. Records from Babylon remind us how eclipses changed thrones. When the sun or moon vanished in alignment, rulers felt their fates sealed. Kings stepped aside, sometimes replaced by substitutes who bore the brunt of cosmic anger, sometimes advised by priests who interpreted shadow as warning. In this way, alignment did not merely reflect politics, it altered it, redirecting power through belief. The Maya carved cycles of Venus into stone, its alignments dictating when wars were launched, when leaders were crowned, when sacrifices were demanded. The sky became calendar, its alignments history's architects. Even in Europe, where Christianity sought to temper superstition, alignments shaped chronicles. The Great Conjunction of 1345, when Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars gathered close, was widely believed to herald plague. When the Black Death soon followed, history itself was written in the shadow of that alignment, reshaping demography, economy, belief. In the Renaissance, Tycho Brahe built his observatories to track alignments with such precision that his data later allowed Kepler to chart planetary motion. Here, too, alignment was not just omen, but origin of modern science. The storm of 2025 carried echoes of this past, for while engineers saw circuits falter and auroras glow, society felt itself part of a story, as though history had once again tilted beneath an event beyond its control. If 3i Atlas were ever to align with Earth, history might once more pivot less through the physical consequence than through how humanity interpreted it. Would it become rallying point for global cooperation, or spark of division, myth against science, faith against reason? Would it be recorded in chronicles as omen, or in archives as data? History unsettles, because it reminds us that alignment is never neutral. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it presses itself into our timeline, whether or not the cosmos intends it. To align is to intrude, to mark, to insist on being remembered. History shows us again and again that alignments become anchors of narrative, the points around which generations build their meaning. And yet, history also gives hope. For from alignments came calendars, astronomy, science itself. From fear emerged systems of knowledge. From omen arose understanding. The very fact that we can now calculate alignments, predict eclipses, chart conjunctions, is legacy of those who once trembled beneath the same skies. If 3i Atlas were to align with Earth, perhaps it too would move us forward toward new science, new cooperation, new humility in the face of the vast. History does not only record fear, it also records growth. Still, unease lingers. For what if history repeats not in progress, but in error? What if superstition overwhelms knowledge? If alignment births conflict rather than unity? If humanity allows old fears to dictate new futures? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once traced into history, its alignment becomes unavoidable, etched not only in the sky, but in the choices that follow. 3. Atlas, and the long record of alignments together remind us that the heavens have always been silent, participants in our history, never speaking, yet always heard. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that when we imagine the future of alignment, we are also reading the past, and in both directions, the sky shapes the stories we tell of ourselves. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth has already been written not in equations or simulations, but in prophecies scattered through texts and traditions? What if humanity, long before telescopes, had already sensed the weight of a future when a wanderer would take its place in perfect symmetry with our world? For prophecy has always lived in alignment, as though the very act of the heavens, bending into pattern, demanded interpretation. And what if, when 3i Atlas is imagined in alignment, it awakens not new predictions, but the memory of prophecies long waiting to be fulfilled? Ancient seers spoke often of stars that would herald change. In Babylonian omen texts, celestial alignments were tied to famine, war, or renewal, each line in the sky a message of what was to come. In the Book of Revelation, later echoed in countless apocalyptic traditions, the alignment of stars and signs was described as prelude to upheaval, a reshaping of the world itself. Among the Maya, the close alignments of Venus and the Sun were believed to open gateways between realms, marking times when gods could intervene directly in human affairs. Even in medieval Europe, astrological charts filled with conjunctions were used to forecast the fates of kingdoms. Alignment, in every tradition, became prophecy's chosen language. Science now regards these texts as history, not warning. And yet, when 3i Atlas is imagined in alignment with Earth, the old prophecies begin to stir again, repurposed for modern ears. Some would claim it fulfills the words of ancient seers, the stranger star, foretold in whispered passages. Others would fold it into astrology, predicting shifts in human destiny tied to the geometry of visitor and home. In the digital age, prophecy would spread faster than ever: forums, broadcasts, and messages, weaving 3i Atlas into every belief system that sought a sign. Prophecy unsettles because it carries authority. Once spoken, it insists on being remembered, and once believed, it shapes choices as though it were fact. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it becomes prophecy waiting to be claimed, not by the stars themselves, but by us, always eager to see fate in symmetry, always ready to let geometry stand in for destiny. The prophecy may be silent, but its echo would be loud enough to change lives. And yet, prophecy is not only fear, it also offers hope, the belief that alignment could mark renewal rather than destruction. A new age of unity, a dawning of understanding, the opening of cosmic doors. These, too, are prophecies, no less powerful than warnings of doom. To imagine 3i Atlas aligning with Earth is to imagine that our world is part of a larger design, that our stories are not accidents, but chapters in something still unfolding. In this way, prophecy softens fear into meaning, offering reassurance that even chaos has purpose. Still, unease lingers, for what if prophecy, once tied to 3i Atlas, reshapes the future more than the alignment itself ever could? What if decisions are made in its shadow, guided not by evidence, but by belief? What if prophecy becomes self-fulfilling, humanity bending toward the destiny it has written for itself beneath a silent sky? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because, once connected to prophecy, it ceases to be fragment alone and becomes symbol, heavy with the weight of imagined futures. 3. Atlas and the prophecies of alignment together remind us that the future is always partly written in the past, and that whenever we gaze upward, we are as much authors of prophecy as readers of it. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that alignment is never only celestial, it is narrative, shaping what we expect before it ever arrives, teaching us that destiny is not always given, but chosen in the way we tell the story. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not omen, not prophecy, not calculation, but symbol? What if, rather than pointing outward toward doom or destiny, it pointed inward, toward meaning that humanity itself assigns? For alignment has always been metaphor, as much as event a language through which we read ourselves, our fears, our hopes, our longing for connection. What if, in the silent crossing of lines, the visitor became less fragment of rock and more mirror of the human spirit? Symbols rise naturally from the heavens. The sun has long been seen as emblem of life, the moon as symbol of change, the stars as signs of fate. When the two align in eclipse, cultures see rebirth, death, or renewal. When planets gather in twilight, they become metaphors for balance, conflict, or harmony. Even in our modern age, constellations retain symbolic power, their patterns woven into myths still told. If 3i Atlas were ever to align with Earth, its symbolism would follow effortlessly. Some would see it as stranger joining us in harmony, proof that humanity is part of a wider community of wanderers. Others would see it as shadow crossing light, symbol of disruption, of intrusion into a fragile order. The strength of symbols lies in their flexibility. A single alignment could be read as warning by one culture, blessing by another, metaphor of belonging by a third. The visitor itself is empty of meaning. It is our minds that carve significance into its silence. The alignment becomes a canvas on which humanity paints its own story. For some, it might symbolize fragility, a reminder that Earth is not center, but participant in a vast choreography. For others, it might symbolize unity, a rare alignment binding us together beneath the same gaze. In both, the symbol carries power, shaping how the moment is remembered long after it has passed. Symbols unsettle because they linger. A scientific event may be archived and forgotten, but a symbol endures, retold in stories, carved into art, whispered into ritual. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once imagined in alignment, it would never again be just a stone in the dark, but a symbol heavy with meaning, carried forward in ways no calculation could erase. The alignment becomes eternal, not in fact, but in symbol, shaping minds long after its geometry has faded. And yet, symbols also heal. They allow us to give shape to what cannot be measured, our awe, our smallness, our yearning to belong. To call alignment symbol is to admit that we are more than observers. We are interpreters, participants in the act of making meaning from silence. Perhaps the visitor, aligning with Earth even in imagination, is gift rather than threat, a reminder that we live in a universe vast enough to hold both rock and metaphor, both silence and story. Still, unease lingers, for what if symbols turn heavy, their interpretations weaponized, their meanings twisted to justify fear or conflict? What if the alignment is remembered not as metaphor of unity, but as emblem of division? What if its symbol becomes scar, not song? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once symbolized, it belongs not to the stars but to us, and we do not always carry our symbols gently. 3i Atlas and the symbol of alignment together remind us that the universe itself is mute, and it is humanity that gives it voice. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that alignment, whether of visitor and world, or of meaning and silence, is less about what happens in the heavens than about what happens in us, each time we choose to see story where there was only shadow and light. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not seen through telescopes, but through altars? What if, instead of being measured in degrees of arc, it was measured in prayers, chants, and rituals that rose whenever humanity felt the heavens lean close? For alignment has always been spiritual, as much as scientific, a reminder to communities that the divine and the cosmos might be one and the same. And what if, when the visitor aligned with Earth, religion and spirituality themselves shifted, reweaving their rituals to include a new silence in the sky? Throughout history, celestial events have never been confined to astronomy. Solar eclipses sent priests in Babylon to their temples, offering sacrifices to appease the gods who had darkened the day. Among the Inca, alignments of sun and moon marked festivals, ceremonies of balance between the divine powers that ruled earth and sky. In Christianity, the Star of Bethlehem became symbol of divine alignment, guiding shepherds and kings alike to a child said to reshape the world. Even in modern times, pilgrimages gather around eclipses and meteor showers, human faith still drawn to symmetry in the heavens. If 3i Atlas were ever to align with Earth, it would almost certainly enter the language of faith. Some would see it as messenger, a fragment crossing paths with us at a moment chosen not by chance but by design. Others would see it as sign of judgment, proof that the universe is not indifferent but intentional, bending its geometry to remind humanity of its place. In mosques, temples, cathedrals, and quiet shrines, sermons would be spoken, prayers whispered, candles lit not for the visitor itself, but for what it seemed to mean. Religion unsettles because it seeks to make eternal what may be fleeting. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once imagined in alignment, it becomes more than fragment. It becomes scripture in the making. Faiths would write it into their traditions, shaping rituals around its geometry, transforming silence into sacredness. And once sacred, it can never again be only stone. It becomes symbol of divine will, whether for comfort or for warning. And yet, spirituality is also solace. For in the alignment of the heavens, many would see not threat, but reassurance. That humanity is not adrift, that there is pattern beyond the chaos. That even a fragment from the deep carries within it the possibility of meaning. To imagine 3i Atlas aligning with Earth is to imagine churches filled with song, mosques filled with prayer, temples alive with incense, and solitary seekers looking upward, each one finding in the symmetry of visitor and world a moment of stillness, a horizon touched by something greater than themselves. Still, unease lingers. For what if faiths divide over its meaning? What if alignment becomes banner of conflict, each tradition claiming it as its own prophecy fulfilled? What if unity turns quickly into division, spirituality becoming boundary rather than bridge? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it ceases to be silent wanderer and becomes instrument of human belief, carrying both the light of reverence and the shadow of discord. 3. Atlas and the spiritual horizon of alignment together remind us that the heavens have always been sanctuary as well as science. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that when lines are drawn between Earth and visitor, they are also drawn between humanity and the divine, whether as symbol of judgment or as promise of grace. To witness such an alignment would be to remember that we have always prayed with our eyes lifted skyward, waiting for the silence above to answer. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth did not only move priests and poets, but presidents and parliaments? What if, instead of being left to quiet awe, the symmetry of visitor and world became a tool for power, folded into speeches, policies, and laws? For alignment has always carried political weight, its meanings drawn not only by prophets, but by rulers eager to hold their people steady or to bend them toward obedience. What if the geometry of a silent fragment could ripple into palaces and councils, shaping decisions as much as it shaped shadows? History shows us that leaders have long used the heavens to justify their rule. Babylonian kings leaned on astrologers, whose readings of eclipses affirmed or threatened their legitimacy. The Roman emperors tied their fates to comets, claiming fiery visitors as signs of divine approval. In medieval courts, astrologers sat at rulers' tables, their charts consulted before wars or treaties. Even in the 20th century, eclipses and space exploration became political theatre, tools to show that nations were favoured or advanced. The sky, though untouchable, has always been a stage upon which power performs. If 3i Atlas were to align with Earth, it would be no different. Leaders might speak of unity beneath a shared sky, calling for calm as millions looked upward. Others might seize upon fear, warning of danger, and using the moment to extend control, to tighten laws, to silence dissent. Some governments might call for scientific cooperation, satellites and telescopes sharing data across borders. Others might retreat into secrecy, framing the alignment as omen meant only for their people. The fragment silence would become a canvas for power, each authority painting meaning to suit its own designs. Politics unsettles because it translates awe into action, and often into control. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it risks being weaponized not by the heavens, but by human ambition. A fragment meant nothing but trajectory could become symbol of authority, proof of destiny, or excuse for power to shift hands. In this way, alignment could reshape not only belief, but governance, carving new paths through law and order. And yet, politics also carries potential. For if governments chose cooperation over fear, alignment could be a moment of unity. Imagine nations sharing observatories, pooling resources, creating a truly global watch for the visitor's passage. Imagine leaders speaking not of threat, but of humility, reminding their people that Earth itself is fragile, that unity beneath the cosmos is not luxury but necessity. In this way, 3i Atlas could serve not as wedge, but as bridge, alignment not omen but opportunity. Still, unease lingers. For what if ambition outweighs humility? What if alignment becomes rallying cry for power struggles? One leader claiming it as proof of chosen destiny, another as warning of rival corruption. What if alignment, meant to be silent geometry, becomes spark for policies that divide, for conflicts that endure long after the symmetry has passed? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it ceases to be quiet stone and becomes political theatre, carrying consequences far beyond the sky itself. 3i Atlas and the politics of alignment together remind us that power is always listening, always ready to claim the silence of the heavens as its own. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that alignment does not only belong to stars and planets, but also to people and nations, and what is seen as wonder in the sky may quickly become struggle on the ground. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not first felt in myth or politics, but in the quiet hum of machines? What if, instead of priests or kings, the first to respond were the astronomers, engineers, and explorers whose instruments never sleep, whose machines stretch farther into silence than our eyes ever could? For alignment is not only symbol or story, it is opportunity. What if, in the moment Earth and the visitor shared a line, our instruments awoke to possibilities that could not be reached in any other way? Science thrives on alignments. When the moon aligns with Earth and Sun, astronomers capture eclipses to study solar flares otherwise hidden. When planets align, spacecraft use their gravity as stepping stones, slingshotting into deeper exploration. When radio telescopes align with passing objects, faint whispers of interstellar chemistry are caught, teaching us how worlds are formed. Alignment is not accident for science, it is gateway, fleeting but powerful, a chance to glimpse what is usually concealed. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, the scientific community would see not omen, but invitation. In observatories, cameras would be readied, calibrated to catch the faintest glint of the visitor's reflection. Radio telescopes would listen for echoes, seeking to measure its density, its texture, its silent story carried from beyond the Sunday. Satellites might adjust their orbits, using the alignment to study how the visitor bends light or affects nearby particles. Even deep space probes, listening from afar, could be commanded to turn their gaze for just a moment, capturing data that would not come again. The alignment, however brief, would be treated as gift, and yet, science admits limits. The visitor may remain stubbornly silent, its surface dark, its signals absent, its presence more shadow than revelation. Alignment might yield no discovery but reminder that some mysteries resist even the most tireless instruments. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once aligned, every unanswered question would weigh heavier, every silence louder, every failed measurement more haunting. In science too, alignment carries risk, the risk of expecting too much from a fragment that offers only passage. Still, Discovery is not only about answers. Sometimes it is about perspective. To align with 3i Atlas, even if briefly, would allow humanity to see itself differently, to measure its instruments against the silence, to sharpen its methods, to grow in humility. For centuries, alignments have spurred breakthroughs. Kepler watching planets cluster to reveal their orbits. Einstein's theory confirmed in the bending of starlight during eclipse. Perhaps, in ways we cannot predict, the alignment of 3i Atlas would open new doors, not because of what the visitor offers, but because of how we learn to look. Science unsettles because it never fully closes the gap. Instruments can hum, telescopes can watch, data can fill archives, and yet, mystery endures. The alignment would be studied, archived, debated, but its silence would still whisper questions science cannot yet reach. Perhaps that is the truest lesson, that science is not about certainty, but about standing in the gap between what is known and what is not, using every alignment as one more step into that darkness. 3i Atlas and the awakening of instruments together remind us that wonder is not erased by measurement, but magnified. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that even when silence lingers, even when discovery remains out of reach, the act of looking, listening, and aligning our instruments with the cosmos is itself an act of reverence, a quiet acknowledgement that we are part of a universe always larger than our comprehension. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth did not only draw our eyes skyward, but turn them inward, back toward the fragile world beneath our feet? What if, in the symmetry of wanderer and planet, humanity was reminded not of omens in the heavens, but of responsibilities at home? For alignment is not only about what lines in the sky, it is about what such lines awaken in us, reflections of fragility, balance, and belonging. And what if the fleeting geometry of visitor and Earth became a mirror that showed us our planet more clearly than ever before? Every great celestial event has carried this double vision. When astronauts turned their cameras back from the moon, Earthrise revealed a small blue sphere suspended in black, and ecology was born anew in the hearts of millions. When comets crossed our skies, poets reminded us of mortality and impermanence, urging care for the fleeting. Even eclipses, turning day into twilight, remind us how fragile light is, how dependent we are on balances we cannot control. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, the same awareness would return, not as threat but as quiet reminder, that we, too, are wanderers, sustained by a balance as delicate as any orbit. Ecologists would speak of parallels. Just as celestial alignments depend on fragile timing, so too does Earth's balance depend on choices made in its atmosphere, its oceans, its soil. The visitor's alignment could become metaphor for our own alignment with nature, how far we have drifted, how urgently we must find harmony again. Climate scientists might point to the event as symbol of smallness, urging stewardship of the planet, whose place in the cosmos is rare beyond measure. The alignment becomes less about a fragment passing in silence, and more about a fragile world holding itself steady in the vastness. And yet, the lesson may be ignored. History shows how easily awe fades, how quickly attention shifts. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, its momentary grace might be lost in noise, its mirror unseen by those who most need to look. The danger is not that alignment would fail to inspire, but that its inspiration would slip away too soon, leaving Earth unchanged, even as the heavens whispered their warning. Still, for some, the message would endure. Children might remember the night they stood outside with their parents, staring upward and then downward, realizing for the first time that Earth itself was gift. Writers might etch into words the idea that symmetry in the sky demands symmetry in our living, that we cannot gaze upward without also caring for what lies beneath. In this way, alignment would not be only astronomy or mythology, it would be ecology. A reminder written in starlight that Earth is fragile and rare. The Earth unsettles because it is easier to look outward than inward. Yet every alignment in the sky eventually returns us to this ground, to this soil, to the air we breathe. Perhaps the truest danger of alignment is not in what the heavens mean, but in whether we choose to see ourselves reflected in them. To imagine 3i Atlas aligning with Earth is to imagine our own alignment with the planet, a fleeting chance to turn awe into care, wonder into stewardship. 3i Atlas and the Earth together remind us that every cosmic event is also earthly, every gaze outward, also gaze inward. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that alignment does not only belong to stars, but to us, and that the truest geometry worth keeping is not a visitor's passing line, but the fragile balance of the world we already call home. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not only recorded in data or prophecy, but painted, sung, and written into memory? What if, instead of fading as a charted event, it became seed for imagination, inspiring art that endured long after the fragment itself had drifted away? For alignment has always awakened the artist's gaze, calling forth images, melodies, and words to capture what cannot be measured. And what if, in the fleeting symmetry of visitor and world, human creativity found its next canvas? Art has always answered to the heavens. The caves of Lascaux contain constellations etched alongside animals, proof that even in prehistory, sky and imagination were already intertwined. The Egyptians aligned temples with solstices, turning architecture into living sculpture that breathed light only on certain days of the year. The Renaissance bloomed under the same stars, painters weaving planets and comets into allegories of faith and fate. Even modern music carries echoes of alignment, symphonies and songs written in the wake of eclipses, auroras, and rocket launches, each an attempt to translate wonder into sound. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, the same impulse would stir again. Painters would capture the imagined moment of symmetry, brushstrokes swirling with shadow and light. Poets would compare its path to the fleeting nature of love, of mortality, of time itself. Composers might score symphonies that rise and fall like orbits, crescendos timed to mimic the hush of alignment. Even filmmakers and digital artists would render the event into visions that blend fact and dream. Their screens filled with color humanity could never truly see, but always long to imagine. Alignment, in art, would become eternal. The strength of art lies in its refusal to end where science does. Data may tell us that 3i Atlas is silent, inert, cold. Art insists that silence has sound, that cold has color, that even the most unyielding fragment carries metaphor. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, it would escape the archives of astronomy and enter the galleries of imagination, impossible to contain within equations alone. The visitor would live on, not in observation, but in interpretation. And yet, art is not only escape, it is also bridge. Through painting, sculpture, poetry, and song, alignment would become shared, carried into households that never saw it firsthand, into generations unborn. Children might study poems about the visitor as though it were myth. Musicians might play symphonies that recreate its silence. Artists might turn its geometry into new forms of beauty. In this way, 3i Atlas would not only align with Earth in space, but with humanity in time, its presence reimagined again and again. Still, unease lingers, for what if art does not soften, but sharpens fear? What if alignment is painted as doom, sung as final warning, written into stories of catastrophe? What if imagination, instead of offering solace, deepens dread? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, it becomes captive to every brush, every word, every note, reshaped into visions that may comfort, but may also haunt. 3i Atlas, and the art it would inspire together, remind us that human creativity is itself a kind of alignment between silence and story, between the unknown and the known. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that when we imagine wanderers aligning with our world, we are not only tracing orbits, but painting mirrors of ourselves, turning the cold geometry of space into the warm resonance of meaning. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not seen as omen or symbol, but as question? What if its geometry, precise yet fleeting, asked of humanity not what happens, but what does it mean to happen? For alignment has always been as much about philosophy as about sight, moments when thinkers turned from the sky to themselves, wondering whether the patterns above revealed destiny or only coincidence. And what if, in imagining the visitor's path crossing ours, we are forced to confront not its silence, but our own need for answers? Philosophers have long lived in the space between stars and thought. The Stoics looked to the heavens and saw order, believing that everything aligned for reason. that fate was inscribed into the very motions of the cosmos. Epicureans, by contrast, saw chance, atoms drifting through void, their occasional alignments, accidents without purpose. In the Middle Ages, scholastics debated whether celestial harmony pointed toward divine design or simply revealed the mechanics of creation. Even in modern philosophy, existentialists gaze upward to argue that meaning is not given by the cosmos, but created within the human mind. Alignment, in every school of thought, becomes battleground of meaning. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, philosophers would speak again. Some would say it proves the order of the universe, a fragment arriving at just the right moment, echo of a design larger than chance. Others would argue the opposite, that alignment reveals only randomness, and the human need to see meaning is proof of our longing, not of truth. Still others would suggest that the event itself is neutral, but our interpretations reveal who we are. Creatures suspended between awe and fear, weaving story where silence prevails. Philosophy unsettles because it refuses closure. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once imagined in alignment, it opens a corridor of endless questions, none of which can be answered with certainty. Was it meant? Was it chance? Does meaning come from the sky or only from us? The visitor becomes less fragment of rock than mirror of thought, reflecting every school of philosophy back at itself. And yet, philosophy also comforts. For in asking questions, it reminds us that mystery is not failure, but essence of being human. To wrestle with meaning is itself an act of alignment, bringing our small minds into harmony with the vast. Just as Plato used celestial order to describe the good, just as Kant used the starry heavens to remind us of moral law, so too would 3i Atlas inspire thought that bridges silence and self. The alignment, whether chance or design, becomes conversation partner for humanity's deepest inquiries. Still, unease lingers. For what if philosophy, like prophecy or politics, sharpens division rather than unity? What if the questions born from alignment lead not to humility, but to certainty claimed too strongly, arguments hardened into ideologies? What if alignment, meant to remind us of mystery, instead becomes banner of belief? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it becomes more than rock, it becomes question, and questions rarely leave us unchanged. 3i Atlas and the philosopher's question together remind us that alignment is never only celestial, it is existential, forcing us to face the tension between chance and destiny, silence and meaning. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that when we imagine wanderers aligning with our world, we are not only asking about the sky, but about ourselves. And in that reflection, we find that the truest alignment may be between wonder and uncertainty. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not only spatial, but temporal? What if its geometry in the sky became less about where it was, and more about when it was an intersection, not of orbits, but of histories, futures, and the fleeting present we so rarely hold? For alignment has always been a clock, as much as a pattern, reminding us that time itself is fragile, stitched together by moments when paths cross and then drift apart. And what if, in the imagined meeting of Earth and visitor, we were being reminded that every alignment is really a moment of time choosing to reveal itself? Civilizations have long tied time to the heavens. The Mayan calendar was built from alignments of Venus, its cycles guiding not only agriculture but destiny itself. The Chinese dynasties marked eclipses as milestones in history, dates that would anchor the reigns of emperors. Even the Gregorian calendar we use today is rooted in celestial alignments, the sun and earth dictating the rhythm of seasons, the feast days, the slow march of centuries. Time has always been read in the sky, each alignment serving as marker, as punctuation in the long sentence of history. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, it too would become a timekeeper. The event would be recorded in archives, its date marked in news, its geometry entered into the databases of astronomers. For generations after, people would look back and ask, where were you the night of the alignment? What did it mean then? What does it come to mean now? Time, once loose, would knot itself around the memory, the moment elevated from passing symmetry into lasting chronicle. But time unsettles, for it reveals how fleeting we are. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once imagined in alignment, it reminds us how short our lives are compared to the vastness of orbits. The fragment has travelled lightless centuries, perhaps millennia, before glancing near us, while our histories unfold in the briefest span. To align with it is to realise how small our chapter is, how quickly the clock strikes and moves on. The alignment becomes not just event but mirror, showing us that our time is borrowed. And yet, within that brevity lies beauty. For alignment also teaches us to cherish the present, to see that a moment shared beneath the sky is worth holding. Just as people gather to watch eclipses or comets, treasuring a memory that cannot be repeated, so too would humanity treasure the night of alignment, even if it brought no revelation but its own passing. Time, once measured in years and centuries, becomes heartbeat, breath, the shared silence of a world pausing together. Still, unease lingers. For what if alignment tempts us to believe too strongly in destiny, as though time itself had bent to bring visitor and earth together for a reason? What if we mistake coincidence for purpose, the fleeting for eternal, and in doing so, rewrite our history around illusions? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once placed in alignment with Earth, it disrupts not only our skies but our calendars, bending our sense of time into new and uncertain shapes. 3. Atlas and the alignment of time together remind us that every moment beneath the heavens is fleeting, and yet no less sacred for its brevity. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that alignment is not only what happens in the sky, but what happens in memory, where a single night can become eternal simply because it was witnessed, and in that witnessing, kept. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth did not write something new, but rewrote what was already old? What if, instead of standing as fresh discovery, the visitor in symmetry with our planet simply awakened myths, long asleep, giving ancient tales new breath? For myth is never gone. It waits, patient, ready to return whenever the sky bends into a shape that looks familiar. And what if, in imagining Earth and visitor aligned, humanity was not creating a new story at all, but rediscovering one it has told 1,000 times before? Cultures everywhere filled their skies with myths. The Greeks saw constellations as gods, frozen in eternal drama, their alignments retold as battles, romances, and punishments. The Norse believed in Ragnarok, a cosmic alignment of worlds destined to bring both destruction and rebirth. The Hindu traditions spoke of yugas, great ages turning with celestial rhythms, alignment marking the end of one age and the beginning of another. Even in the Pacific, navigators read the stars as stories, every crossing of paths between constellations retold as voyage or encounter. The heavens were not silent to them, they were endless libraries of myth. If 3i Atlas were ever to align with Earth, those myths would stir again. The visitor might be seen as trickster, wandering into place at the perfect moment, testing humanity's courage. It might be cast as herald, a messenger of change whose symmetry with Earth signals the turning of an age. Some might weave it into prophecies of the past, claiming it fulfills visions long foretold. Others might craft entirely new myths, where the fragment becomes sibling of Earth, aligned in kinship rather than in threat. In every culture, the silence of alignment would be filled with story, and story would become myth reborn. Myth unsettles because it does not die easily. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once imagined in alignment, it guarantees that myths once forgotten will return, reshaping how humanity explains the sky. And myths, unlike equations, cannot be disproved. They live on in imagination, surviving as long as people tell them. A single alignment could ripple for centuries, echoing in tales long after the visitor itself has vanished from sight. And yet, myth is also comfort. It offers meaning, where silence offers none, continuity, where time seems fleeting. Myths remind us that humanity has always looked upward and wondered, always found in the heavens reflections of its fears and its hopes. To imagine 3i Atlas aligning with Earth is to join hands with countless generations who have stood beneath strange skies and told stories to steady their hearts. Myth does not only explain the unknown, it connects us to those who also searched for meaning in the shadows. Still, unease lingers. For what if myths divide rather than unite? What if one culture's story of the visitor as savior collides with another's tale of it as destroyer? What if the alignment, instead of drawing humanity together in shared narrative, fractures us into rival myths, each claiming truth? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once drawn into myth, it ceases to be stone alone and becomes story. And stories wield power far beyond silence. 3. Atlas, and the rebirth of myth, together remind us that the sky is not only chart of physics, but stage of imagination. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that alignment, whether of stars, fragments, or worlds, is never final. It is retold again and again, becoming story each time, until the silence of the heavens is indistinguishable from the voices of those who watch them. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not remembered as an event at all, but as memory woven into the fabric of human lives? What if it lingered not in telescopes and archives, but in the recollections of those who looked upward, each memory carrying the weight of silence translated into story? For alignments do not end when their geometry dissolves. They echo in memory, reshaped every time they are retold. And what if, in imagining the visitor's symmetry with Earth, we are already imagining the memory it will leave behind? Memory has always clung to the sky. People remember where they stood during eclipses, the sudden chill, the strange twilight that turned day into dream. Generations recall the night Halley's comet blazed across the heavens. Children lifted onto shoulders to see a fragment of history made visible. Even the astronauts who left Earth carried memory home, the image of our fragile planet, suspended in blackness, a sight that never left them. These moments become more than observations. They become shared memories, told across time, like family stories, intimate and vast at once. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, the same weaving of memory would unfold. Some would remember standing in fields, their breath fogging in the cool air, gazing at a sky they would never see again in the same way. Others would remember the voices of broadcasters, narrating the event as though it were theatre. Still others would carry only the memory of fear, the unease of not knowing what the alignment might bring. Each memory, though different, would stitch itself into the greater fabric, the event no longer belonging to science alone, but to the quiet archive of human experience. Memory unsettles because it reshapes truth. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once aligned, it would be remembered in 1,000 ways, many of them contradictory. Some would recall awe, others dread. Some would swear they saw signs in the sky, while others would insist nothing unusual occurred at all. Memory blurs, bends, edits itself, until what is recalled is not the event, but the impression, not the silence of alignment, but the story we gave it. In this way, the visitor would become immortal, not in orbit but in recollection. And yet, memory is also gift. It preserves awe, allowing it to outlast the fleeting geometry of the stars. Even if alignment lasts only a moment, memory allows it to endure in words, in photographs, in whispered retellings years later. A child who remembers watching with a parent might tell the story to their own children, the alignment living on in the quiet continuity of families. In this way, 3i Atlas would align not only with Earth, but with generations, passing from witness into inheritance. Still, unease lingers. For what if memory becomes myth too quickly, the line between truth and imagination dissolving? What if the alignment is remembered not as it was, but as people wished it had been transformed into omen, into miracle, into warning? What if the memory, instead of preserving awe, distorts it into something unrecognizable? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, its truest form would be lost to memory, replaced by stories too fluid to hold silence still. 3i Atlas, and the memory it would create together, remind us that no celestial event ever truly fades. It lingers in the minds of those who witness it, reshaped until it belongs as much to imagination as to reality. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that alignment is never final, for once it is seen, it becomes memory, and once remembered, it is eternal in ways no orbit could achieve. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth did not remain in the waking world at all? What if, once witnessed, it slipped beneath the surface of thought, carried into dreams, where it lingered as symbol, as shadow, as strange companion. For alignments do not only mark calendars or histories, they also shape the inner landscapes of imagination, seeding visions that rise in sleep. And what if, long after the skies had quieted, the visitor still returned to us in dreams, reminding us that awe does not end with waking? Dreams have always been tied to the heavens. The Babylonians recorded visions in which stars spoke to kings, their alignments guiding decisions of state. Indigenous cultures across the world saw dreams as journeys into the cosmos, where souls traveled among constellations to seek wisdom. Even modern psychology admits that dreams borrow symbols from the day, reshaping them into surreal theatre of the night. An eclipse, a comet, or a meteor shower, witnessed by day, often appears again by night, magnified into visions that blur reality and imagination. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, it would slip easily into that theatre. Some might dream of it as companion, a wanderer pausing beside Earth, like a stranger who shares the road before vanishing again. Others might dream of it as threat, a shadow looming, its alignment turning into collision in the unconscious mind. Still others might find it woven into metaphors more personal, a reminder of loved ones lost, of journeys unfinished, of questions that have no waking answers. Dreams are mirrors of our inner lives, and the visitor, once aligned, would find infinite reflections there. Dreams unsettle because they blur truth. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, it would haunt not only our telescopes but our sleep, appearing in ways no science could predict. A fragment that never spoke might still whisper in dreams, its silence translated into stories that feel as real as any memory. And though the alignment would pass in waking time, in the dream world it might return again and again, eternal guest of the unconscious. And yet, dreams are also healing. They allow us to wrestle with awe in ways waking life cannot. A child who feared the alignment might dream of the visitor as gentle light, comforting them until fear dissolved. An artist might wake with visions of shapes and colours that could never be seen in reality, gifts of a mind touched by the cosmos. Even those haunted by troubling dreams may find in them a kind of catharsis, the alignment transformed into narrative, fear turned into story, unease softened by imagination. In this way, the visitor becomes more than fragment, it becomes companion of the psyche. Still, unease lingers. For what if dreams are not gentle, but consuming? What if the alignment births nightmares so vivid they linger beyond sleep, reshaping waking life with dread? What if the visitor, once aligned, becomes not symbol of awe but recurring shadow, carried in every night's rest? Perhaps that is why the fragment should never have been found, because once aligned, it would not only live in our skies, but in our inner worlds. And those inner worlds can be darker than any orbit. 3. Atlas and its presence in dreams together remind us that alignment is not only astronomical, it is psychological, a joining of outer and inner worlds. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that when the sky leans close, it touches not only our telescopes, but our minds, planting seeds of story that bloom in the dark, where silence speaks more clearly than any voice. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not only captured in data and memory, but in language itself? What if, in trying to describe the fleeting symmetry of visitor and world, humanity invented new words, new metaphors, even new ways of speaking that lingered long after the event had passed? For language is not fixed, it bends to awe, expands to hold silence, reshapes itself whenever something arrives that cannot be named. And what if, in imagining this alignment, we are already imagining the words that will carry it forward? History tells us that language often grows from the sky. The word disaster comes from the Latin dis astron, a bad star, an ill alignment. Enthusiasm, once meant to be possessed by a god, often invoked under celestial omens. Even the names of days, Sunday, Monday, Saturday, are borrowed from celestial bodies, the language of time itself aligned with the heavens. When eclipses and comets appeared, chroniclers reached for metaphor, describing them as dragons devouring suns, or torches burning across the night. Each event pressed against the limits of words, forcing language to grow. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, we would struggle for words again. Scientists might coin sterile terms, cataloguing the geometry as alignment event 3IA1, a marker in data archives. But poets, journalists, and everyday witnesses would refuse sterility. They might call it the night of the crossing, or the silent symmetry, or the visitor's embrace. Families might create nicknames that pass through generations. Children growing up with stories not of Three-Eye Atlas, but of the night the sky leaned close. Language would fracture and multiply, each community inventing the phrases that felt truest. Language unsettles because it reveals both power and fragility. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found, because once aligned, it would colonize our speech, slipping into idioms and metaphors until even those who never saw it spoke as though they had. Phrases like waiting for alignment might become shorthand for patience, or to cross like the visitor might mean to appear only briefly, yet leave lasting impression. A fragment of rock could outlive itself in the simplest turns of phrase, immortal not in orbit, but in words. And yet, language is also gift. It ensures that awe is never lost, that silence can be translated into sound. Even if the visitor never returned, the words it inspired would remain, anchoring future generations to the memory of alignment. Just as the word eclipse carries centuries of meanings both scientific and spiritual, so too might atlas come to mean more than catalogue or myth. It might mean alignment itself, the rare meeting of paths in an endless sky. Through language, the fleeting would become permanent, the silent given voice. Still, unease lingers, for what if language twists the meaning too far? What if fear dominates, and the words we inherit describe not wonder but dread phrases of doom, expressions of endings? What if future generations know Three-Eye Atlas only through fearful metaphors, its alignment spoken of as curse rather than grace? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, its silence is no longer its own. It becomes shared, reshaped by every tongue, turned into meanings it never intended. Three-Eye Atlas, and the language it would inspire together, remind us that words are themselves alignments, meeting points between silence and thought, between what is felt and what can be spoken. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that alignment does not end with geometry. It lingers in the words we choose, and through those words, the visitor's silence may echo forever. What if the alignment of Three-Eye Atlas with Earth did not fade into archive or memory, but became ritual, a recurring marker woven into the rhythm of human tradition? What if, even though the visitor itself might never return, its moment of symmetry was replayed year after year in festivals, in ceremonies, in acts of remembrance that bound people together beneath the sky? For humanity has always turned fleeting wonders into enduring customs, transforming what was once singular into cycle. And what if, in imagining this alignment, we are already imagining the rituals it would leave behind? History is full of such transformations. The solstices and equinoxes became festivals across the world, their celestial precision celebrated with fires, dances, and prayers. Eclipses, once feared, became predictable and thus ceremonial, marked by processions and chants that shifted over centuries from fear to reverence. Even comets, though unpredictable, were written into calendars, their visits anticipated by those who believed them tied to kings, births, or wars. Each event began as a fleeting moment of awe, but through ritual, it became permanent, woven into the pattern of human life. If Three-Eye Atlas aligned with Earth, the same might occur. Communities might gather each year on the date of alignment, lighting lanterns to mimic the crossing, their glow recalling the visitor's brief symmetry. Temples and churches might incorporate prayers that mark the event, treating it as symbol of humility before the cosmos. Scientists might host public viewings, turning observatories into stages where memory becomes celebration. Even families might invent their own traditions, sitting beneath the night sky, telling the story of the visitor as though it were myth kept alive by ritual repetition. Ritual unsettles because it binds. Perhaps Three-Eye Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, it risks becoming not just moment of awe, but anchor of obligation. Something people feel compelled to honor even when its meaning fades. Rituals endure beyond reason, carrying forward not only wonder, but sometimes superstition, even division. A fragment meant to be silent could become festival, its geometry translated into dances and chants long after the stars themselves had forgotten. And yet, Ritual is also gift. It ensures that awe does not vanish into the past, but is remembered, shared, renewed. A single alignment might pass unnoticed by history, but a ritual keeps it alive across centuries, offering future generations a doorway back into the silence of that night. Just as bonfires still burn at solstice, just as festivals bloom when seasons turn, so too might humanity find comfort in repeating the memory of alignment, turning it into rhythm of belonging. Still, unease lingers. For what if rituals diverge? What if one culture treats the alignment as omen of unity, while another marks it as reminder of doom? What if the shared sky fractures into rival traditions, each guarding its interpretation with zeal? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, it would no longer belong to the heavens alone. It would belong to us, to our rituals, our divisions, our celebrations, bound into rhythms it never chose. 3i Atlas, and the rituals it might inspire together, remind us that humanity cannot resist the urge to make patterns, to repeat, to remember, through ceremony. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that alignment is never only about stars, but about us, about how we gather, how we remember, how we turn silence into song and moment into tradition, carrying the visitor with us, long after it has passed from view. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not seen through telescopes or archives at all, but through altars, prayers, and hymns? What if its fleeting symmetry became more than a matter of geometry, but a passage into the sacred, a sign interpreted not by astronomers, but by worshippers? For every great wonder of the sky has been absorbed into faith, reshaped as symbol of what lies beyond the human, beyond the known. And what if, in imagining the visitor aligned with Earth, we are also imagining how it would be received as sacred mystery? Religions have long looked upward for meaning. The ancient Egyptians read alignments of Sirius with the Nile as divine calendar, proof that God still guided their world. In Christianity, a star guided wise men to Bethlehem. A single point of light made sign of incarnation. In Islam, the crescent moon and its cycles anchor the rhythm of fasting and feasting, celestial timing woven into devotion. Even in modern times, eclipses and comets have been taken as omens, folded into sermons and prophecies that insist the heavens and the divine are never separate. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, faith traditions would stir with interpretation. Some would see it as reminder of creation's vastness, a call to humility before a God who rules stars and stones alike. Others might proclaim it prophecy fulfilled, a fragment crossing our path as if to awaken the faithful to imminent change. Still others would resist, insisting it is nothing more than rock, warning against idolatry of the heavens. The sacred is rarely uniform. Alignment would become battleground of interpretation, a symbol claimed by many voices. Faith unsettles because it magnifies meaning. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once aligned, its silence would no longer be silence. It would be sermon, scripture, sign. Whether or not it intended to be, a passing fragment could be elevated into revelation, its geometry rewritten as proof of destiny or divine will. The danger is not in what the visitor brings, but in what humanity chooses to make of it. And yet, faith is also solace. For many, the alignment would not stir fear but comfort, the sense that the universe is not random, that there is pattern, purpose, presence, woven into its silence. To pray beneath the alignment, to chant or sing, would be to feel part of a story greater than oneself. Faith would transform the fleeting into eternal, the ordinary into holy. The visitor, in this way, would not only pass earth but touch the human spirit, becoming symbol of connection to the divine. Still, unease lingers. For what if sacred interpretation divides more than it unites? What if one faith claims the visitor as herald of salvation, while another names it as warning of destruction? What if the alignment becomes source of zeal, conflict, even violence, all born from different readings of the same silent fragment? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, it could not remain neutral. It would be drawn into human longing for signs, and signs, once read, cannot be unread. 3i Atlas and the sacred alignment together remind us that the heavens have always been more than physics. They have been mirrors of belief, canvases upon which humanity paints its deepest hopes and fears. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that when the visitor aligns with Earth, it does not only cross our orbit, it crosses into our faith, into our need for meaning, and in doing so becomes sacred whether it ever wished to or not. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not only charted by astronomers and pondered by philosophers, but seized by rulers, twisted into tool of power? What if, instead of wonder, it became weapon, its symmetry used to sway crowds, to justify wars, to crown kings, or topple governments? For celestial events have never remained outside the grasp of politics. They have always been claimed, reinterpreted, and wielded as instruments of rule. And what if, in imagining the visitor's fleeting geometry, we must also imagine the hands eager to possess its meaning? History offers many such lessons. In ancient China, emperors were judged by the heavens, their legitimacy tied to comets and eclipses. A failed alignment could mean loss of the mandate of heaven. In Rome, generals consulted augurs, who interpreted celestial patterns as divine approval for campaigns. Medieval monarchs leaned on astrologers to predict successions and battles, their courts shaped as much by stars as by steel. Even in modern centuries, leaders have invoked celestial events in speeches, wrapping themselves in the aura of destiny. The sky, silent though it may be, has always been politicized. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, leaders today might act no differently. Some would stand beneath the alignment and declare it proof of their nation's special role, claiming the heavens themselves aligned to bless their people. Others might invoke it as warning, a reason to tighten control, to demand unity against an imagined cosmic threat. Campaigns might even time speeches or announcements to coincide with the date, hoping the shadow of the visitor lent them gravity. A fragment without voice could be made to speak the language of power. Politics unsettles because it reduces awe to agenda. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, it would no longer belong to the sky alone. It would be written into laws, echoed in parades, carved into monuments, each claiming ownership of what cannot be owned. A moment meant to be fleeting would be frozen, harnessed for purposes far removed from silence. And in the struggle to control its meaning, the alignment could become less wonder than weapon. And yet, politics also reveals the collective pull of awe. Even if leaders manipulate, they do so because people care, because alignment inspires enough to be worth claiming. Crowds gathering to witness the event would themselves become political, their very presence proof of unity, however temporary. A dictator might twist alignment into propaganda, but a child still looking upward in quiet wonder would remind us that the sky cannot be fully owned. In every misuse, a residue of truth remains, that the alignment touched humanity enough to be fought over. Still, unease lingers. For what if power twists the event so deeply that awe is forgotten altogether? What if, centuries later, the alignment is remembered only through the laws, battles, or monuments it inspired, rather than through the silence it carried? What if politics erases the sky and leaves only itself? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, it is dragged into human ambition, and ambition seldom leaves beauty intact. 3i Atlas and the politics it would inspire together remind us that power always seeks to own the sky, but the sky resists ownership. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that when the visitor aligns with Earth, it may be claimed by rulers, twisted by agendas. But above them all, it remains silent, reminding us that no matter how loud the voices of power grow, they can never truly command the stars. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth did not end with wonder, but with invention? What if, instead of merely being witnessed, it drove humanity to build, to measure, to reach further into the silence with instruments of glass, steel, and code? For every great moment of the sky has always given rise to tools, new ways of seeing, of recording, of knowing. And what if, in the imagined symmetry of visitor and world, we are also imagining the machines humanity would forge in response? Science has always grown alongside the heavens. The astrolabe, delicate and intricate, allowed sailors to navigate by stars, transforming oceans into maps. Galileo's telescope turned wandering points of light into moons and rings, rewriting humanity's sense of scale. Photography of eclipses revealed structures of the sun invisible to the naked eye, while radio telescopes extended vision into frequencies no human could hear. Each new alignment or wonder in the sky pressed against the limits of human senses, demanding new instruments to capture what could not otherwise be held. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, the laboratories of the world would stir, telescopes would be tuned, algorithms adjusted, satellites angled to track every flicker of its passing. Engineers might design instruments that measure its reflection of sunlight down to the faintest whisper, or attempt to map its composition through spectroscopy as it crossed Earth's orbital path. Perhaps even missions would be proposed, rockets sent to follow the visitor, to catch the afterglow of alignment, to capture fragments of knowledge before it was gone. The silence of symmetry would be translated into streams of data, billions of lines written into the language of science. Technology unsettles because it never stops at answering one question. It opens 10 more. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, it would launch a chain of inventions not easily undone. A telescope built to study the visitor might reveal other anomalies, demanding still greater tools. Satellites pointed at the fragment might become permanent watchers, feeding a hunger for surveillance of all skies. In the pursuit of one alignment, humanity might find itself reshaping entire disciplines, not for silence, but for endless interrogation. And yet, technology is also gift. It allows us to see what eyes cannot, to hold in memory what would otherwise vanish. A child watching the alignment through a backyard telescope would carry wonder into adulthood, perhaps inventing new instruments to pass it on. Data captured in one fleeting night might inspire breakthroughs in unrelated fields, from optics to computing. The visitor, though silent, might become catalyst of progress, aligning not only with Earth but with human curiosity, propelling it into new orbits of thought. Still, unease lingers. For what if technology distances us from awe? What if, in dissecting every photon, every angle, every fragment of data, we forget the silence itself? What if the alignment becomes nothing more than figures on a screen, the human gaze mediated entirely by machines? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, it risks being consumed not by wonder, but by analysis, its mystery reduced to charts until nothing of silence remains. 3i Atlas and the instruments it would inspire together remind us that science, too, is a kind of alignment between what is seen and what is known, between silence and the tools that try to measure it. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that when the visitor aligns with Earth, it does not only shift orbits, it shifts perception, teaching us once more that invention is born not from answers, but from questions carried on the wind of stars. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not remembered first by poets or priests, but by machines? What if its fleeting symmetry was captured in endless archives of code, pixels, and datasets, preserved not in fragile human memory, but in the durable circuitry of artificial minds? For in our age, the first to notice wonder is often not the eye but the sensor, not the scribe but the server. And what if, when the visitor aligned with Earth, its truest witness was not humanity at all, but the quiet intelligence of machines built to remember? Already, machines are the first to see the heavens. Satellites orbiting Earth record the faintest glimmers invisible to human sight. Automated telescopes scan skies each night, alerting us to comets, asteroids, and novae before any stargazer notices. Artificial intelligence sifts through oceans of data, finding patterns that no mind could isolate unaided. For decades, the human role in astronomy has been shifting from eye to algorithm. The cosmos has already become more machines' discovery than ours. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, it would be machines that preserved the alignment most fully. Digital records would chart its orbit to the second, its angle measured in microdegrees, its reflected light broken into spectral lines. Supercomputers might simulate the visitor's trajectory millions of years backward and forward, tracing its origin and its future in ways no human imagination could follow. Algorithms would tag and catalogue every image, every number, ensuring that long after we forget, the data remains, preserved in the durable silence of storage. But digital memory unsettles, because it is indifferent. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, its wonder would be swallowed by algorithms that preserve without awe, that remember without story. To a machine, the event would be file, entry, timestamp. It would never feel the chill of standing under stars, never sense the tremor of insignificance that alignment brings. The visitor would survive more completely in machine memory than in ours, but stripped of all the tremors that make memory human. And yet, digital witness is also gift, for without it, our own fragile recollections would fade. A future generation could reopen the files, see the images, run the simulations, and in doing so, recover something of that night. A child not yet born might learn of the alignment not through myth or sermon, but through a clean dataset, and still find awe in the sheer precision of it. The machines do not feel, but they preserve, and in preservation, they offer us a chance to return. Still, unease lingers. For what if, in depending on digital witness, we lose our own? What if we look less at the sky and more at the screen, trusting machines to carry awe for us? What if the alignment becomes not a night remembered in silence, but a dataset viewed in graphs and numbers? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, its memory belongs more to machines than to humanity. Its silence stored in archives that will outlast us, unread yet enduring. 3. iAtlas. And the digital witness together remind us that the sky is no longer ours alone. It is also the domain of the machines we have built to extend our gaze. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that alignment in the age of algorithms is not only celestial but digital, and that to preserve silence in code is both salvation and risk, a way of ensuring the visitor is never forgotten, even if we no longer know how to feel what it meant. What if the alignment of 3 iAtlas with Earth was never meant for data at all, but for brushstrokes, melodies, and stories? What if its fleeting symmetry, rather than being measured, was translated into human expression, the kind of art that does not seek to explain, only to capture the feeling of silence made visible? For every great wonder of the sky has left not only records, but songs, carvings, tapestries, and poems. And what if, in imagining this visitor's alignment, we are also imagining the art it would inspire? Throughout history, art has been shaped by the heavens. The cave paintings of Lascaux are believed to depict constellations, ancient dots of ochre linking stars into story. The Egyptians carved sky maps into tomb walls, their colours still glowing with myth thousands of years later. The Romantic painters of Europe filled canvases with comets and eclipses, luminous streaks against stormy skies, symbols of beauty and dread. Even in music, the cosmos has echoed, from Gregorian chants marking celestial feasts to symphonies that try to capture the sweep of infinity. Art has always been the translation of awe. If 3 iAtlas aligned with Earth, art would blossom again. Painters might portray the visitor as streak of silver, poised against a horizon of quiet blue. Poets might imagine it as mirror, a brief companion to Earth in a darkened sea. Musicians might weave its passing into themes of longing, harmony, or inevitable departure. Films, novels, and digital art might reimagine the event as myth reborn, reshaping the visitor into hero, ghost, or omen. The alignment, though silent, would find 1,000 voices in human creativity. Art unsettles because it shapes how we remember. Perhaps 3 iAtlas should never have been found because once aligned, it would cease to be fragment alone and become symbol, its silence painted into canvases, written into poems, woven into myths. Generations who never saw it might grow up knowing it only through an image, a song, or a tale. The visitor would no longer be itself, but what we chose to make of it, remade through metaphor until the line between truth and creation blurred. And yet, art is also gift. It allows silence to live beyond its moment, carrying awe into hearts that never stood beneath the event. A child centuries later might read a poem of alignment and feel its stillness, though the sky above them is unchanged. A painting might hang in a gallery, its colours whispering the story of a night long gone. Music might be played in dark halls, the echo of an imagined alignment, reminding listeners that beauty is not confined to one age or one sky. Through art, the fleeting becomes eternal. Still, unease lingers. For what if art distorts more than it preserves? What if the alignment, through centuries of retelling, is remembered not as it was, but as something else entirely grand when it was subtle, terrible when it was gentle? What if the visitor becomes not fragment but fantasy, until no one remembers the silence itself? Perhaps that is why it should never have been found, because once aligned, it risks being captured not in truth, but in imaginations that will not let it go. 3. Eye Atlas and the art it might inspire together remind us that beauty is not only in the sky, but in the human heart that tries to mirror it. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that alignment is never silent for long, because once witnessed, it will be sung, painted, written, and remembered not as it was, but as it felt, which may be the truest alignment of all. What if the alignment of 3-eye Atlas with Earth was not merely geometry, but question and invitation to think, to wrestle with the strangeness of existence itself? What if its fleeting symmetry became mirror, forcing us to ask why anything aligns at all, why fragments wander, why Earth sits in its orbit and we upon it? For philosophers have always looked upward, not for data, but for meaning, finding in the sky endless metaphors for life, chance, and the fragile balance of being. And what if, in imagining this alignment, we are already imagining the questions it would plant in us? Philosophy has long turned to the heavens. Plato wrote of perfect spheres, believing celestial motions reflected eternal ideals. Aristotle saw the stars as unchanging, their permanence contrast to earthly flux. Later, philosophers like Giordano Bruno dared to suggest infinite worlds, each alignment echo of countless others. Even in modern thought, existentialists have looked to the night sky and felt both dread and wonder, the silence above serving as metaphor for the silence of the universe toward human longing. The sky is not only background, it is canvas for thought. If 3-eye Atlas aligned with Earth, the questions would bloom again. Was its path chance or necessity? Does the universe spin with purpose, or are alignments nothing but accident dressed in beauty? Should we see in its silence reminder of our smallness, or affirmation that we belong to a cosmos vast and unfolding? Some philosophers might argue it proves the indifference of the universe, a fragment aligning without care for us. Others might insist the very fact we noticed gives it meaning, that alignment matters because consciousness was there to witness. Philosophy unsettles because it resists conclusion. Perhaps 3-eye Atlas should never have been found, because once aligned, it would ignite debates with no end, questions that unravel certainty. It would not rest as fragment in orbit, but as idea lodged in thought, reminding us that to seek meaning in silence is both gift and burden. A geometry of stones might seem simple, but philosophy ensures it never is. And yet, philosophy is also gift. It ensures we do not pass through awe untouched, that we pause, reflect, wonder. The alignment might inspire essays, dialogues, classrooms, alive with voices arguing what it means to exist in a universe where such things can occur. It might push thinkers to refine questions of chance, determinism, and purpose, using the visitor as metaphor for human life itself, brief, wandering, yet capable of alignment. In this way, the fragment becomes more than object. It becomes catalyst for thought. Still, unease lingers, for what if philosophy fractures into despair? What if the alignment convinces some that life is meaningless, a random crossing in a cold cosmos? What if, instead of wonder, it breeds nihilism, stripping existence of warmth? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because, once aligned, it forces us to confront questions we may not be ready to hold, questions that echo too loudly in the silence. 3-eye Atlas and the philosophy it might awaken together remind us that the cosmos is not only a physical place, but a field of thought, where every alignment is both orbit and question, both silence and metaphor. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that meaning is not given by the stars, but by us, and that in wondering why fragments align, we discover why we ourselves search for alignment at all. What if the alignment of 3-eye Atlas with Earth was not remembered through science or ritual, but through story? What if its fleeting geometry became tale told by firelight, novel woven into chapters, myth carried across generations? For humanity has always explained the sky, not only with instruments, but with narrative, turning silence into story, so it might be shared. And what if, in imagining the visitor's alignment, we are also imagining the fables and epics it would inspire? From the earliest days, people have looked upward and told stories. The constellations themselves are literature written in stars: Orion the hunter, Andromeda chained, Scorpio rising to chase. The Epic of Gilgamesh spoke of celestial bulls, the Greeks of Zeus hurling thunderbolts from the sky. Even modern novels and films thread the heavens into narrative, from Jules Verne's journeys into space to science fiction's endless reimaginings of alien contact. The night sky has always been more than backdrop. It has been stage for stories too vast for Earth alone to hold. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, stories would bloom anew. Writers might craft novels in which the visitor is omen, its crossing sparking revolutions or endings of worlds. Folklore might paint it as wandering spirit, pausing beside Earth to watch humanity before vanishing again. Children's tales might soften it into friend, a celestial traveller who leans close to whisper comfort in the dark. Even films might reimagine the alignment as turning point silent fragment, reworked into symbol of hope, loss, or destiny. Each genre would claim the visitor, reshaping its silence into plot. Story unsettles because it does not preserve truth. It reshapes it. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, it would no longer be fragment, but character, its orbit rewritten as narrative arc. Centuries later, people might not remember the alignment itself, only the novels or myths it inspired. What began as silence could be remembered as dialogue. What was geometry might be retold as destiny. Story ensures memory, but not accuracy. And yet, story is also gift. It ensures that alignment is not locked in archives, inaccessible except to specialists, but carried in the hearts of those who hear and retell. A grandmother's bedtime tale might keep alive the memory of the visitor long after the last photograph has faded. A novel might inspire readers to look at the sky differently, to sense wonder in what is otherwise overlooked. Stories allow awe to travel, to reach across borders and generations, to become part of culture rather than isolated event. Still, unease lingers. For what if stories eclipse reality altogether? What if, centuries from now, no one believes 3i Atlas was ever real, dismissing it as legend? Or worse, what if its myths grow so powerful they are taken as literal truth, shaping lives and societies, not in memory of an orbit, but in loyalty to fiction? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, it would be absorbed into stories we cannot control, stories that might outgrow the silence that birthed them. 3i Atlas, and the stories it would inspire together, remind us that alignment is never only about stars. It is about the narratives we create to hold them, the myths that carry silence into memory. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that when a fragment aligns with Earth, it does not pass quietly into darkness. It lingers in tales, becoming eternal not in orbit, but in imagination. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth did not fade as memory alone, but became object, carved into stone, pressed into metal, preserved in relics that carried the silence into material form? What if the fleeting geometry was captured not only in words or images, but in artifacts built to endure, touchable echoes of a moment otherwise gone? For humanity has always marked the heavens with objects, leaving traces of awe in things made by hand. And what if, in imagining the visitor's symmetry, we are also imagining the relics it would inspire? History is filled with such tokens. The Maya carved celestial alignments into stelae, stone calendars marking cycles of sun and star. Medieval Europe minted coins after eclipses and comets, small pieces of metal carrying cosmic memory into markets and homes. Astrolabes and sundials became both tools and treasures, their brass faces etched with patterns that echoed the heavens. Even in the modern age, missions to the moon returned with rocks encased in glass, displayed as relics of journeys beyond Earth. Each object made the infinite tangible, holding silence in material form. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, relics would emerge again. Medals might be struck, etched with the date and the arc of its path. Sculptors might craft monuments, tall and spare, to recall the visitor's crossing. Museums might preserve fragments of data in engraved plates, designed to outlast digital decay. Even simple objects, posters, photographs, jewelry might serve as personal relics, carried by families who wanted to remember the night alignment touched their world. The silence would be given shape, made visible. made touchable. Relics unsettle because they outlast memory. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, its silence would be frozen into stone and steel, artifacts surviving long after the story was forgotten. Future generations might hold the relic without knowing the alignment it marked, mistaking symbol for truth, object for event. The visitor's fleeting orbit could become permanent in ways it never intended, its silence reimagined through things rather than through sky. And yet, relics are also gift. They anchor memory, ensuring that awe is not lost entirely to time. A monument can draw the gaze upward, reminding people to wonder even if the event itself is centuries past. A coin or carving, discovered in an attic or unearthed in soil, might reconnect someone with a story nearly forgotten. Relics keep silence alive in ways that words and data cannot. They are physical bridges between moment and memory, presence and absence. Still, unease lingers. For what if relics become worshipped rather than remembered? What if the fragment's alignment is no longer story of silence but cult of object, its relics treated as sacred beyond question? What if humanity, in its need to hold awe, confuses material with meaning? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because, once aligned, it tempts us to trap silence in stone, and in trapping it, we risk distorting it. 3. Atlas and the relics it might inspire together remind us that awe is never only fleeting. It seeks permanence, form, weight, and perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that silence cannot truly be contained in objects, but the attempt to do so is itself part of being human, a way of carrying the infinite in hands that cannot otherwise hold it. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not remembered forever, but slowly slipped away, lost beneath the tides of time? What if, despite relics and records, despite poems and data, the night of symmetry faded into silence, once more forgotten by those who came after, as though it had never been? For human memory is fragile, more fragile than stone, more fragile than stars, always vulnerable to the forgetting that shadows even the brightest flame. And what if, in imagining the visitor's alignment, we must also imagine the day it is no longer known? History is filled with wonders, now lost to forgetting. Ancient civilizations recorded eclipses and comets we no longer connect to our calendars. Great monuments, once aligned to solstices, have been buried, their meanings guessed at rather than known. Even stories passed down by word of mouth bend and blur, transformed until their origin is no longer visible. What once filled crowds with awe can, in time, dissolve into rumor, myth, or nothing at all. The sky itself forgets us. Why should we imagine we will not forget it? If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, memory might last only so long. For a time, it would live in art, ritual, data. But centuries later, archives might decay. Digital storage corrode. Languages shift until words themselves no longer carry the same meaning. Monuments might crumble, relics might be melted down or misplaced. The alignment would survive only as faint echo in myth, a story told without detail until even that is forgotten. A fragment that once aligned might vanish not in orbit, but in memory. Forgetting unsettles because it strips permanence from awe. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found because once aligned, its silence would carry the weight of being remembered, a weight memory cannot always bear. To know something might be forgotten is to recognize the futility in holding it too tightly. Every memory is a tide that recedes. And what if the alignment, once so vivid, becomes nothing more than silence again, this time not in the sky, but in the human mind? And yet, forgetting is also gift, for it makes room for new awe, new alignments, new stories. If humanity remembered everything perfectly, nothing would shine, nothing would feel rare. The fading of memory is what makes each moment precious, reminding us that awe cannot be held indefinitely, only experienced. The alignment might be forgotten, but in being forgotten, it would return to its origin silence, untouched, unclaimed, free of human weight. And perhaps that is the truest memory of all. Still, unease lingers. For what if forgetting robs us not of burden, but of connection? What if the alignment's silence was meant to remind us of our place in the cosmos, and without it, we drift further into believing ourselves alone? What if memory, fragile though it is the only bridge between awe and meaning? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, it enters memory, and memory is destined to fade. 3. I, Atlas, and the fragility of memory together remind us that even silence is temporary, that what is known today may vanish tomorrow, carried away by forgetting as surely as by distance. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that we should not cling to awe as though it can be preserved forever, but cherish it as fleeting gift, knowing that even if memory fails, the silence of the cosmos remains. What if the alignment of 3i Atlas with Earth was not singular, not fleeting, but part of a rhythm that extends beyond all human calendars? What if what we call rare was simply one note in a melody too vast for us to hear in full, repeating endlessly across the corridors of time? For eternity is not measured in years or centuries, but in the patient cycles of the cosmos, where even fragments like 3i Atlas may belong to patterns greater than anything we can imagine. And what if, in imagining alignment, we are also imagining its place in eternity? Philosophers have long pondered cycles. The Stoics believed the universe itself was eternal recurrence, each moment destined to happen again in infinite repetition. Hindu cosmology speaks of kalpas, vast epochs where universes are created, destroyed, and remade without end. Even science suggests echoes of recurrence. Galaxies collide and reform. Stars are born, die, and are reborn in nebulae. The idea that nothing is singular, that all is pattern, has haunted human thought for millennia. If 3i Atlas aligned with Earth, eternity would whisper through it. Perhaps this was not the first alignment, nor the last, but one of countless crossings hidden in time's abyss. Long before humans named the stars, the visitor may have aligned with Earth unobserved, and long after we are gone, it may do so again, indifferent to our presence. The symmetry we call miracle may be nothing more than inevitability, a line written long ago into the geometry of the cosmos, repeating forever, whether or not there are eyes to see. Eternity unsettles, because it strips uniqueness from awe. Perhaps 3i Atlas should never have been found, because once aligned, we might be forced to admit it is not miracle but pattern, not singular but endless. To think that our greatest wonder is one of infinite repetitions is to confront how small a role we play, how little of eternity we can ever hold. Alignment would become not treasure, but thread, vanishing into fabric too vast to grasp. And yet, eternity is also gift. It means that awe is never truly lost, that the silence we witness is not confined to one fragile night. Even if memory fades, even if relics crumble, alignment may happen again, offering future generations the same wonder we once knew. Eternity ensures that silence repeats, that beauty recurs, that awe is never exhausted but renewed. What feels fleeting is, in truth, infinite, belonging not to us alone, but to all who will ever look up. Still, unease lingers, for what if eternity robs us of urgency? What if, knowing alignment will return, we dismiss its value in the present? What if we treat awe as disposable, assuming it will always be there again? Perhaps that is why the visitor should never have been found, because once aligned, we risk forgetting the fragile uniqueness of the moment, trading its beauty for the illusion of endlessness. 3i Atlas and the pattern of eternity together remind us that alignment is both singular and infinite, both fleeting and eternal, depending on how we choose to see. And perhaps their greatest lesson is this, that every moment, even one destined to repeat, matters because it happens now, in the silence we share, in the breath we take as the visitor passes. Eternity does not erase wonder, it deepens it, reminding us that in a universe of infinite crossings, the one we witness is always ours.